I love when it happens to snow during these talks. It makes me feel like I should schedule more talks 2 months in advance, and then amazingly we can make an accurate 2-month forecast, which we usually can't do right now. Let's talk about weather, let's talk about snow, and let's turn this thing on. There we go. So my wife, Lauren, who's not here tonight, we live down in Boulder, reminded me at the beginning of this season, she said, Joel, you know, I've seen a lot of your talks, and people love the science, and we're going to talk about the science. But she said, you know, people really also just want to get excited about snow, and they want you to bring the stoke. So with that in mind, I will bring the stoke. This was 20 days ago. Oh, is that delightful? I mean, it just doesn't get any, like, that's why we do this. That was, should we do that again? Hold on a second. Yeah, okay. Cool, this is November 4th and 5th, 24-hour time lapse of the mid-mountain stake, not even blue sky, but the mid-mountain stake going up to 15 inches. That doesn't happen very often, and we've already had twice this year where we've seen something like that. So that is, you know, by definition, bringing the stoke. I did not know, actually, how impactful this picture would be until about 5 minutes ago. But more stoke, obviously the back bowls opened a few days ago. And this is the girlfriend of one of our employees, Sam Collentine. And her dad happens to be here, which I did not know at the time. But, you know, more stoke. And here's even more. This is my wife, Lauren. This is from a couple years ago up at Steamboat. She is demonstrating the, do we have sound? I just remembered to ask on the HDMI.
Sure.
Okay, let's try it. She's demonstrating the science of how you classify snow. All right, here is the definition of 20 to 1 powder, 20 inches of snow to 1 inch of liquid. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, there's science every day out there, right? All right, and last early stoke before we get into some of the science, this was, let's see, a year and a half ago, right? And January 22nd at Vail, and this is another way to demonstrate the thickness of snow. Oh, delightful. Ah. Yeah, we called that day, and actually Jess was with us that day too. It was Jess and Sam and I. We called that day Max Fluff, and we'll talk about this toward the end of the talk, just how to classify snow and the fluffiness of snow. But that's why I do what I do, because that's so much fun. All right, so this talk, skiers, riders that love powder, and we're going to get a little nerdy about the snow as well. We're going to do both of those things. So the whole reason I started OpenSnow was to kind of spread this confidence and knowledge of it's not just, oh, yay, it's snowing, but can we learn a little bit more about why? Do we have a lot of confidence in the forecast, less confidence, where should I go, and how to play in the snow. So tonight we're going to talk about climate. We're going to talk about the seasonal forecast and how to find the best snow. So those are the three things: climate, seasonal forecast, how to find the best snow. Before I keep going, is there anything else aside from climate, seasonal forecast, and how to find the best snow, or any particular question that you have? Yell it out now. I will either incorporate it into the talk, or I'll just answer it right now. I want to make sure if there's something on the top of your mind, we get to it before those beers do.
How do you get all that content out every morning?
Question was, how do I get all that content out in the morning? I wake up early, not as early as some people wish, but very early. The process takes about 2 hours of me looking at, about half of that is looking at data, the other half is writing, organizing. I have tried my best over the years to shorten that process, to make that process more efficient, but I can't, because there's just a certain amount of time needed for me to look at the information, congeal it in my mind, and figure out how to present it, and write it and spell check to make sure it's all good. I will say that when you do something every day for a number of years, you get reasonably good at doing that thing. So it has become easier for me, but it takes time. And tonight, after this talk, I'm going to go back to my friend's house in Edwards and spend 2 hours writing tomorrow's email newsletter and getting that set up. So it's a ton of work, but one, I love it, and two, the hard part only lasts for 6 months, and then I get to relax a little bit from May through October. So I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm looking for sympathy. This is, everybody has to work hard in something, and I'm happy to work hard in this. It's quite fun, but it is a lot of work in the morning. So I don't drink coffee either. I hate the taste of coffee. Why did I become a meteorologist? Or how did it? I'll talk about that in 2 slides. Good question. Anybody else? Down here? Yeah. El Nino. Yes, we'll talk about that too. Got a couple slides on that. Good call. Anybody else? Yes.
About the source of the data.
The source of the data. Not a ton, so I will talk about that now. We use National Weather Service data. We use the European weather model, and we kind of average all of that and multiple versions of that to present the forecast and present the data. That's just the forecast side. The reporting side, how much snow fell, we get that via the resorts. So there are a handful of, we don't control that data. The resorts, most people think that, let me phrase, the most annoying thing of data portion, or the most annoying data part over the last 8 years of building the business has been snow reporting. Because it seems like it should be easy, right? 8 inches fell, 8 inches gets reported, we show that on the website, easy. That already happened. That's not a forecast. That's just what happened. The reality is it's kind of like whisper down the lane. So a mountain will look at the snow stake or whatever they have. They will then transfer that, somebody, usually not the director of marketing. Everybody thinks the director of marketing is involved at 5 in the morning to somehow inflate that number by 30%. That is generally untrue for every ski area. It is usually a patroller or a night watch person. Trust me, it is not the director of marketing. Somebody will take that data, let's say 8 inches, and they will go to the back end, the admin end of their own website, and enter that in. How many trails, all that kind of stuff. Then they will go to the admin part of Colorado Ski Country's website, enter that in, except if you're Vail Resorts, which doesn't participate in that. Of snowcountry.com, which pushes that data far and wide, and where we pull that data from. Then they'll go to the back end of onthesnow.com, and then that data gets put. So one person, effectively, unless they program it, has to enter the same data across multiple websites. So occasionally we're human, we mess up, basically. So it's annoying because people look at us and say, oh, OpenSnow, you sent out an incorrect report, and the most I can say is, sorry, like we just got that data from them, and I wish we could do a better job of controlling it, but we just can't. We can't send our own people, up on the hill to measure our own snowfall, basically. We hope to build a system using SnowTel, which we'll talk about, and weather model data to kind of estimate snow reports as well, to kind of provide a double check. Also for early and late season, before and after resorts report, because you'll notice on our site, even that snowfall that you saw up there from early November, Vail wasn't open. That 15 inches of snow doesn't get officially reported far and wide, but if we use model data, we can at least kind of estimate that as well. And for backcountry, it's nice to use model data to at least estimate what fell at a hut system or something like that. So we're always managing data sources. Yeah. Yes?
What are your longer range plans for your company?
Oh man, we're going right to the good stuff here. The question is, what are the longer range plans for the company? I really like what I do. We really like what we do. We have a small team, which I'll talk about. We are a sustainable, profitable business, and I'd like to continue that for a long, long, long time. We have had somewhat serious interest in being acquired. We haven't gone down that road, and there's all sorts of positives and negatives if something like that were to occur. But this is not one of those things where I like it for a couple years and I'm on to build the next thing. Like this, as a kid, this is exactly what I wanted to do. So if I did this for another 20 or 30 years, that would be pretty fun too. So you bet. All right, let's keep rolling. As you can tell, happy to answer questions. So if you have more during the talk, just raise your hand. Okay, so let's get to it. Why OpenSnow? Because that's really fun, right? That's at Blue Sky Basin a couple years ago. 18 inches on the ruler sticker there, and I mean that's as good as it gets. Open tree runs with fluffy snow. Also ski in the backcountry. A lot of people ski in the backcountry. It is just lovely to be outside in fresh powder and the smiles on your faces. I know that sounds, all marketing and stuff, but like that's the deal, right? Very few people are upset when you're out on the hill skiing, and so that was kind of the foundation for OpenSnow. I've loved the weather since I was 4 years old, amazingly. Full nerd since near birth. Anybody from Pennsylvania in here? Where are you from? Allentown. So you know Shawnee Mountain. Yes. You know Blue Mountain, which is where that picture was taken. Anybody else from Pennsylvania? Where are you from? Pittsburgh. That's the wrong side, but we'll let it roll. Pittsburgh is Nazareth. All right. Anybody ski Shawnee Mountain ever? We got a couple takers. I love it. So my parents took me to Shawnee Mountain when I was 4 years old. I fell asleep on the way to the parking lot, but apparently I was hooked. So I raced because that's what you do, especially in the East. When you like skiing, you grow up racing. I was not very good because I didn't like taking massive risk, but I did learn how to ski pretty well. I went to Penn State for meteorology. Any Penn Staters in here? Yay! Awesome. So I went to Penn State for meteorology, and I raced there, and that was all fun and games. And then my first powder day was out at Alpine Meadows in Lake Tahoe. And imagine this. I get out there with a friend of mine who I met in college who had grown up there, and I had my race skis, right? They're about that wide, and they're about 160, and I couldn't imagine why anybody would need anything other than a race ski. And it snowed about 15 inches overnight. And I immediately found out why you need something other than a race ski. I fell about 10 times down the first run. But I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. I moved to Colorado for grad school to attend CU. And so this is the story of OpenSnow. So I really like snow. I really like powder. I have this meteorology degree. And a good friend of mine from school, some of you might know Megan Gilman, who I knew at Penn State, her uncle, Gary Gilman, who has owned Steammaster out here for, I guess, 30 years, we were skiing together. And we had a great powder day, and at the end of the powder day, we did the mile, intern mile, and Gary turns to me, says, I think tomorrow's going to be another powder day. He kind of just like looked up at the mountain, like, it's going to keep snowing. I was like, oh, old man, I've got these fancy weather models. You're out of your mind. The snow's going to end. And he's like, no, tomorrow's going to be another powder day. That's fine. I'm going to drive back to Boulder. Drove back to Boulder, and it was dumping on Vail Pass. And I was like, oh, I made the wrong call. And that made me really mad, right? Like, how does this guy that has no formal science training in meteorology, but has lived here, what does he know locally that I didn't pick up? So that was story one. Then the next year, I was skiing Breckenridge. It was actually November. It was right around Thanksgiving. I was skiing Breckenridge. We had 6 or 7 inches. It was a good early season day. And my friend Tamara texted me and said, I just skied booby deep powder. I was like, what? And for reference, she's 5'6", like, normal size. And I was like, all right. I mean, I understood as a meteorologist that sure, the snow can vary a little bit from one location to the next. But how could I ski 6 inches of powder at Breckenridge and 50 miles, 60 miles as the crow flies, there was 4 feet of snow? Like, what happened? Like, that's crazy. So that just spurred me into action to try to figure out how to not miss powder days, right? So I wanted to, be in knee-deep powder and not miss those powder days. So basically, I spent 2 years reading every forecast I could find, looking at all the data, making my own forecasts, having my friends laugh at me when my own forecasts were wrong. They still do. And trying to figure out, okay, what are these details? Right? What are we missing in some of these storms that can help us figure out the big powder days? So eventually, in December 2007, I sent an email to 37 friends and said, hey, stop texting me for the forecast every day. I'll just put you on an email and I'll just send one every week. And that was the start. And those friends forwarded it to other friends, and it was a blog. It was called Colorado Powder Forecast. Some of you might remember that. And then it became OpenSnow when we added more forecasters. And last year we reached over 2.5 million people, which is awesome. And I want to thank you. Well, I want to thank you. Don't clap for me. I want to thank you because we've done virtually no advertising. This is word of mouth growth of you guys telling friends on the lift, things like that, which is amazing. And I couldn't be more thankful for the support and being able to live the dream. Oh, also, we have this summer app called Open Summit, which does kind of lightning forecasting for the higher peaks too, so check that out. None of this is possible without a full team of people. People think, oh, it's OpenSnow is Joel Gratz. Well, you might know Joel Gratz, but we have 5 full-time people, including Andrew Murray, who does all the back-end web stuff, Eric Smith, who does our mobile apps, new app coming out next week, by the way, Sam Collentine, who basically runs the back end of the business and does a bunch of forecasting, and Eric Strasburger, who does sales, and then we have forecasters all across the country. So this is a whole team effort, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that, because there's no way that one person, me, can run this business. All right, let's get to it. Climate. This is average precipitation across the United States. Rain, melted snow, the whole thing. What do you notice about Colorado? Dry in most places of Colorado. So in the mountains, the higher peaks in the mountains around here get about the same amount of precipitation as everything east of the Mississippi and along the west coast. The rest of Colorado, Denver, Boulder, Grand Junction, very dry. Denver gets about 40 to 50% less, actually 60% less precipitation than New York. That's rain and melted snow. I like to point this out, and this audience, you guys are in tune to the science and understand this, but I like to point this out because a lot of people move to Colorado from elsewhere, me included, and most other places in the country, there is more precipitation than here. So you just kind of assume, oh, Colorado, it should look like where I came from, right? We want tree-lined streets or a bunch of grass or whatever. Well, guess what? We don't have a lot of water here. And a lot of the water that we do have flows somewhere else. So I'll get off the soapbox, but it's useful to understand just how little water we have compared to other places in the country. And that has nothing, by the way, to do with climate change. I mean, this is independent of climate change. This is just, we are just dry in general compared to other places in the country. All right, let's take a look at some long-term records of temperature. So Steamboat, and I'll go through a couple cities here and mountain stations. This is a record of 120 years of temperature data from Steamboat. And this is in town, not up on the mountain. And you can see there's some waviness, but definitely some upward trend of a couple of degrees here over the last 30 or 40 years. Is that isolated to Steamboat? Nope. So this is Dillon over another 100-year trend. Reasonably stable, although definitely another 2 or 3 degrees of a trend over the last 30 years. This is from the Snowtel station. Now this is just since 1987 when they put the Snowtel site in, which is an automated backcountry weather station, very close to Mid-Vail. Very close to Mid-Vail. And you can see, hard to see these numbers in the back, this is 36 degrees, this is 40 degrees. So just over this period, and really over the last 10 to 15 years, the average temperatures increased 3 to 4 degrees. Now, most of this is made up of overnight lows getting warmer. Daytime highs are not warming that much, but overnight lows are not getting as cold as they once were. Does this trend continue? Yep. Anybody been to Schofield Pass? Yeah, between Crested, Butte, and Aspen, beautiful back there. Probably up there mountain biking the 401 trail. Similar trajectory from Vail or to Vail, 4-ish degrees or so over the last 20 years. And Crested Butte, long-term record, interesting waviness here, but over the last 30 years or so, there's a few degrees increase. And finally, down at Wolf Creek, again, about another 4-degree increase. Across the state, last one, just in the Front Range in Boulder, a couple of degree increase over the last 30 years, but some waviness too. So basically, averaging all the stations across Colorado, you see a definite trend over the last 30 years of a couple of degree increase. Is this going to continue? Probably. I mean, I'm a weather forecaster. I'm not certain about very much. But highly likely. The best science that we have, averaging many models out through 2050, shows an increase of another couple of degrees in the next 30 years. The warmer models show even more warming. The cooler models still show some warming. So the best estimate that we have, it's going to keep warming. Now, has that impacted our snowpack across Colorado? Interesting question. So this is snowpack over the last 35 years. Slight down, this is across the entire state. There's a slight downward trend here, and there are definitely some bad years that you probably remember. But when we extend this back to 1937, so 80 years of snowpack data, there's really not much of a trend here in snowpack data. There are some bad years, but there are also some bad years in the 70s as well. Now I'm going to overlay, oh, by the way, this is from Weather 5280, which is a blog kind of like OpenSnow, but it's dedicated to the Front Range in Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs. So if you're down there, check them out. They do great work. I'm going to overlay same graph that we just saw, 80 years of snow history. The orange line is average temperature. So you can see average temperature, market increase over the last 30 or 40 years. But the snowpack hasn't greatly responded to that. Now some people point out, hey, look at these really bad years, it was really warm. It kind of goes hand in hand though, because the years that don't offer much snow usually get a lot of sun, high pressure, it just happens to be warmer. My guess about what's going on here is Colorado, most of our weather stations and most of our mountains are at a high elevation. So even a couple of degrees of warming isn't stopping the snow because it's still plenty cold enough to snow. Over the next 30, 40, 50 years, if the temperatures keep warming, eventually it will get warm enough that even the higher elevations will begin to be impacted. But so far, there hasn't been a massive impact in the snowpack for most stations. Does that make sense? Any questions? Yeah. So let's get to precipitation. Rain plus melted snow. Any trend? I'm going to fly through this. Steamboat, no real trend. Dillon, no real trend. Vail, it looks like there's a trend, but really that's just a couple bad years of the last 4 or 5. Generally, there isn't much of a trend here. Schofield Pass, no trend. Crested Butte, no trend. Wolf Creek, there is a downward trend, which is interesting, but not most of the stations show that, so that bears more investigation. Boulder, no trend, even a slight upward trend. So in terms of precipitation, no trend so far. The forecast for the next 30 years, forecast for the next 30 years, the models are basically saying, we don't know. The average of a bunch of models, if these colors look washed out to you, that's because they are. They basically show we don't know what's going to happen. The wettest models say it's going to get wetter. The drier models say it's going to get drier.
So what's the climate prediction for this? Climate model for those predictions? Is it no warming, some warming?
Well, so this is just precipitation.
Yeah, I know, but it's exactly. Different models have different amounts of precipitation. There's a lot warming, there's less precipitation maybe.
No, yeah, unfortunately it's not that clear. This is an average of a bunch of models. So most of the models on average show warming, but when it comes to precipitation, some say more, so some say less, and so there's not a clear trend. I'm not saying that there won't be a trend in 30 years, but we just don't have a whole lot of confidence in what that trend's going to be. I know you have a question, give me 1 second. Let me just do 3 bullet points to summarize this, and we'll do the question. So temperatures, they've increased, and they'll likely continue to do so. That's our best forecast. Precipitation. No trend in the past, and there's low confidence in any future trend. But put those two together. Warmer temperatures, let's just say there's the same amount of precipitation. You have to imagine that we will have earlier snowmelt, right? A higher rain-snow line, because it's warmer temperatures, there will be more rain versus snow, and there could be more drought conditions, because a warmer atmosphere, there's more evaporation, and so you lose more moisture from the ground into the air. So even if precipitation doesn't change, there will still be impacts due to the temperature. Sorry, yep.
Well, I was going to ask, it seems that the snowpack numbers are a bit of a oversimplification based on what you just said. That if we have fewer days, which we know the trends already indicate, fewer days of freezing temps, snowpack is melting sooner. So the snowpack data itself seems an oversimplification as compared to what's the total length of time that we actually have a snowpack on the ground and what's happening in the spring. Because we know our soils right now are drying out sooner than historically, and that's one of the, that contributes to a more dramatic fire season.
So, absolutely. None of this is to say that the climate isn't changing and it's not warming. The main point to this is that invariably every 2 or 3 week dry spell that we have, people point to climate and say, oh, it's not snowing, right? Or it doesn't snow as much as it used to. And based on what we've seen, that's not necessarily true. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't impacts from earlier snowmelt or a shortening season or less freezing nights and all of that. That is true. I just wanted to point out that it is not so simple as just to say, oh, climate is changing and it's not snowing anymore, right? There are impacts, but there are nuances to that as well. And so, just off the soapbox, but that's what the data shows. I don't want anybody to be confused. We see the climate is changing and there are impacts, but not everything is showing up in snow data in terms of maximum snow depth and how much snow we're getting. But there are issues with snow melt and soil moisture and all that, absolutely. Yep. All right. That wasn't all about Stoke, was it? That was pretty upsetting. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned also that for us, because our mountains are so high, that a couple of degrees isn't making that much of a difference in snow. However, what about other states? Have you looked at other states out there?
Now, I haven't looked in detail, but you go any other places with a lower elevation, California, Tahoe, British Columbia, the Northwest, they've had to deal with rain snow issues for hundreds of years, right, because their mountains are lower. So every degree of warming is much more impactful to them now than it is to us, basically. I haven't looked at that in detail, but yes, basically. Any other questions about climate?
Could it be that latitude has a factor? I was just looking at the Wolf Creek data.
Maybe, and there is a feedback too, because if it's warmer, then there's not as much soil moisture, and so there's less evaporation into the atmosphere, which means there could be less moisture. But it's really tricky. There's, talk about a multivariate problem, like very, very tricky. Yep. All right. Okay. On I hate to like de-stoke tonight, but we have to. That's not a word, probably, but we have to. Just to set the stage, I want to talk really briefly about last season, talking about destoking. So what happened? This is temperature, this is precipitation. That line is roughly the storm track. There is no single storm track. Storms don't follow a railroad track. This is kind of just an average of what we saw. And you could say, well, last season wasn't great. You're right. But I would say it just missed. You're like, just missed? Yeah, just missed, because that storm track, if that would have been 50, 100 miles southwest, it would have been an amazing season. And in the scheme of the atmosphere, 50 to 100 miles is nothing. That is a tiny, tiny amount of distance. So this was the snowpack map at the peak of last season at the end of March. Orange and red shows below average snowpack, blue shows above. So great snowpack up here, not so great most other places. Again, roughly the storm track, we kind of just missed. And this is a graphic showing the snowpack over the course of a season, starting from 0 in early October, peaking in early April, and then melting out during the summer. The red line is the median, and this dark blue line was last season. This is statewide. So tough going statewide. I will get to Vail, but let me just kind of set this up. This is the same graphic, basically, just different colors. The black line is average, and the orange line is what actually happened. Whistler in the Northwest did great. Tahoe, not so great. Tahoe got almost all the precipitation in 1 month. Whoop! Park City, not great. These dashed lines are the record high and record low. So Park City's snowpack was basically tracking record low until basically the end of the season. So in Colorado, the Southwest was just the worst. Telluride's wonderful, but they had a very tough season, setting new lows last year. Crested Butte in the central part of the state, a little better than Telluride, but still not great. Vail, as you well know, was tracking near record lows and did a little bit better right around closing. But then interestingly, right along the divide, Breckenridge, Arapahoe Basin, Loveland, Winter Park, Eldora, much closer to average, usually just below average, but much closer. So again, that storm track was just a little off. All right, happier talk. Yes, in the back before I get there. About 30 years. Those are based on SNOTEL data, the backcountry weather stations, which were generally installed in the late 70s through mid 80s. So 30-ish years. Yes?
For last year, would you just quickly comment on the persistent ridge that pushed the storm tracks to the north? Can you just comment on that quickly?
There was a persistent ridge, and it's really unfortunate. So like why, is that the question? Kind of like why did we have that? Or...
No, just what was the setup that caused the storm?
Yeah, so I wish I could give you a simple answer to this. We all want a simple answer. It was El Nino, it was La Nina, it was a ridge, it was the jet stream. The reality is, because I get this question all the time, and the opposite is true, like, well, why are we getting so many storms now, or why is it so dry? The reality is, again, it is a super multivariate problem. It is not just El Nino, it is not just La Nina, it's the ridge of high pressure. Great. Why is the ridge of high pressure there? There's a massive interaction between a bunch of different forces. There's sea surface temperatures, there's snowpack over Siberia. I mean, I'm not trying to sound glib, but there is so many variables that it's really tough to, if you can point to the ridge and say, the ridge was there. Why wasn't the ridge 100 miles to the west and allowing the storm track to hit us? I don't know. I mean, that's the answer. I have a friend who has a PhD in meteorology who gets paid way more than I do to research weather for commodity companies, because actually knowing slight differences in these quantities is very helpful to be able to predict soybean crops or corn crops or natural gas prices. In the best of forecasts, they can explain maybe half the variability due to, like, they can forecast maybe half the variability. The other half is kind of just, we don't know yet. So, like, why was the ridge in a place that didn't give us snow, but pushed the storm track just 100 miles north versus 100 miles south? There's 40 factors, and how they all interplay is the tough part. And I know that sounds like, oh man, I don't know, or I'm just kind of answering, trying to make fun of it, but like, it's really that hard. Trust me, if we knew exactly why that was happening, we would be able to make much better longer range forecasts. And when you read papers or studies that say, there's going to be more ridging and more precipitation or whatever, there's not a whole lot of confidence in any of that yet. This is a really, really hard problem from everything that I've read. Yeah.
Relationship between the Ninas and the jet stream track is based upon empirical data, not upon models.
Both, and I'm going to get to that actually.
Okay.
Good question. Yeah. So let's talk about this season, because this is exactly the deal. So let's talk about El Nino and La Nina. How many people have heard about El Nino and La Nina? Yes. You've heard about them for a few reasons. One, water temperature differences in this region of the Pacific. By the way, we're up here just, there's Australia, there's South America, to put this in perspective. These boxes are just human, we just put boxes around it so we know where to measure the temperature, right? Like, it just helps us. So this is where we look at for El Nino. If these water temperatures are well above or below average, it changes storm track patterns. Actually, it changes thunderstorm patterns around the equator, which changes upper level wind patterns, which changes the storm track. That's why we care about this. The other reason we care about this, as skiers, we want to talk about snow in August and September as we're getting excited for the season and before it's snowing. And El Nino is one of the only things we could talk about that early. So we just start talking about El Nino and La Nina. Also, over the last 50 years, about a third of years have been El Nino, warmer than average water temperatures. About a third have been La Nina, cooler than average water temperatures. And about a third have been La Nada, roughly average water temperatures. So in 2/3 of all years, there will be some flavor of El Nino and La Nina, another reason why you hear about it all the time. So this is a percentage chance of having El Nino, basically a very high chance, and it's already happening, and it is weak to moderate El Nino this year. So based on, and your point, based on previous El Ninos and previous sea surface temperatures and all of these other factors, I am not an expert long-range forecaster, but I have read numerous other forecasts, tried to deduce, do I believe that? Why do I believe that? Do I not believe that? And this is kind of the storm track that it looks like that people are alluding to for this season based on the current setup. A good northwest storm track with cold air over the east and some flavor of a southern storm track pumping in plenty of moisture. Now you might say, oh man, it looks like both of those storm tracks just missed Colorado. These are not railroad tracks through the sky. This is an artist's representation of what we think might happen. And remember, they could be north of there, south of there, east of there, west of there. This is just kind of a guess. All right, long-range forecasting is incredibly hard. My friend who makes a ton of money and works with a lot of other people who make a ton of money and have spent their life researching long-term patterns, at best can only explain and forecast about 50% of the patterns 2 to 4 weeks out. So forecasting a pattern 6 months out, this is why I don't spend a ton of time on OpenSnow talking about what's going to happen this season. It's fun to discuss and it's a fun science problem, but it's not very impactful for us as a decision-making process. All right, so I want to show you what has happened during previous El Nino seasons. Because you might say, cool, let's look back at other El Nino seasons, and that's a good guide to what's going to happen this year. So this was 2002, 2003. The blue dots show above average snowfall. The red dots show below average snowfall. So it kind of looks like there was a little bit of a northwestern storm track. The northeast was cold. And we did have enough moisture coming in that some areas of the west coast and the southwest had average to above average snowfall. Here's the thing I want to mention. This is one season, 2002, 2003. I'm going to flip the screen, or flip the slide, to another season with El Nino, 2009, 2010. Now, theoretically, if all El Ninos generate about the same weather, the dot pattern you see up here should be similar to the dot pattern you see on the next slide. Ready, set, go. This is 2009, 2010, another El Nino year. Totally different. That storm track was shifted further east. We did have really good moisture in the southwest, but it left most of our mountains up here in the north dry. 2002, 2003, 2009, 2010. Point being, every El Nino is different. Every La Nina is different. If it was one single factor like that, our seasonal forecast would be really accurate. Unfortunately, it's not. There's other factors at play. Other sea surface temperatures are important as well, and other things as well. So that was a long-winded way of saying, not totally sure, let's enjoy the snow when it comes. All right, so let's talk about the current snow as it's coming. So again, for reference, this is last season's snowpack, no bueno around here, and so far this season. Most of our state is above average. I know these storm tracks look a little nutso. I swear I didn't have a beer when I drew these. But we did early in the season, we had kind of a northwestern storm track. And then over the last 2 weeks or so, we had more of a west to east storm track, which hit Tahoe as well. This is what I mean. People want a single answer. Oh, it was a northwest storm track, or it was El Nino. This is just over the last 4 weeks, and kind of look at the different storm tracks. Imagine that over 6 months, right? It is a complex system. Looking closer here to Colorado, Vail is here. What are these outlines? These are not county outlines. What are these outlines? River basins. Very good. All of this data these snow tell sites I talk about, these backcountry weather stations, they were put in by the government, our tax dollars, thank you very much, in the late 70s and early 80s to measure snow, not to measure snow though. Why do they really want to measure snow? To measure water, of course. How much snow is in the mountains so we know how much water will run off in the spring, fill the lakes, fill the reservoirs, fill the streams. So that's why most of these charts look like really weird boundaries, because these are river basins. So Vail's river basin is the upper Colorado headwaters, and we are at 131% of average right now. And that's averaging multiple stations. That's a good thing. Southwest isn't looking as great, but 2 more storms and they'll be back to normal. Another way to look at our current snowpack, this year today, last year today. Yeah. It's good. Everybody's in a much better mood when it's snowing. I mean, come on. This light blue line was last year. This thick blue line is this year. And so we're sticking right around average, or just above, which is nice. Now remember, average is still a low number because it's early season. So you miss a couple storms for a week, you go below average. You get a couple storms, you go well above average. But still, I'll take the trajectory. I like it. All right, speaking of the trajectory, let's look at the long-range forecast. Sorry, I just wanted to look at what the colors look like back here, and they look a little different than what I'm used to on the screen, so that's why I wanted to make sure I said it right. Here's Colorado. This is a forecast I'm going to show you for the next 15 days. Do you trust 15-day forecasts? No. We're going to look at it anyway, unless they're good. Yeah, unless they say it's going to snow, then we totally trust the forecast. So what you see up here is an average of 20 versions of the American GFS weather model. Because we know one version out to 15 days, no way that I trust that. But you run the model 20 times, tweaking a bunch of things. If they all kind of agree, yeah, maybe we have some trust, right? So the blue areas are storminess, colder air, some snow. The red areas are less stormy, warmer. So every little blip forward that you see is going to be 6 hours, and I'll kind of call out the storms. So this is the little storm, the weak storm that we're getting right now. This is the bigger one that's coming Thursday night through Saturday. I think a lot of the brunt of it will be south of here, but Saturday morning might be sneaky good. This is the next storm from Sunday through Monday and Tuesday. It looks like the brunt of that will go south, unfortunately, but it will stay cold here, so we'll retain our snow. Maybe as this one moves away on the tail end, we'll get some light snow. The next one then, hot on its heels. Doesn't look like it's hot on its heels because it's taking a while, but it's coming, I swear. This one also looks like it's going to track even further south, but we might get a little glancing blow. Then, sometime around the 8th, next Saturday, it looks like we get at least a couple days of dry, sunny, warmer weather. It's December, the sun angle's low, we're not losing any snow at this point in the higher elevations, but it will be sunnier. And then it looks like there's an end in sight as this starts to move, this other area of storminess starts to move in sometime around 12th, 13th, 14th. So if we get a dry spell, probably be limited to a week or less, which is pretty good news. And again, I don't fully trust 15-day forecasts, but that's been the trend so far. So this is good, right? Like I know we want it to snow a foot every other day, but even a couple inches and staying cold, just remember last year, and you'll be very thankful for what we have right now. All right, let's talk about wind direction really quick. This is what we want. Wind hitting a mountain being forced to rise. Snow falls because when air goes up, it expands due to lower pressure. When it expands, it cools, that ideal gas law thing. When it cools, moisture condenses into rain or snow. So you need moisture and you need lift. One of the best ways to lift the air around here is air hitting a mountain being forced to rise. There's other ways too that we can talk about, but that's a big one. Then on the other side of the mountain, the air descends, warms up, dries out. So these are the preferred wind directions. Remember those 2 years that I spent forecasting for my friends and they made fun of me? This is what I was trying to figure out. What are the wind directions that are favored for each mountain range? For Vail, it is clearly northwest. Northwest. So let's take a look at that real quick. There's Vail. Vail is bounded by big mountains on many sides. So for instance, if we get a wind from the east, it goes over the Gore Range, which goes up to 13,000 feet. So the wind goes over the Gore Range. Pretend this is the Gore Range, and I'm Vail. The wind goes up over the Gore Range and descends down into Vail. That is very bad. That is not going to lead to very much snow at all. But the other way is quite good. So it's blocked on many sides, but northwest is best. The other thing that I think happens, we all know that East Vail gets a lot of snow, more than the mountain even. What I think happens is this air hits the gores and gets funneled in. And so when you have more air being pushed into a smaller space, it goes even faster and there's more of it to be forced upward. That's my guess, at least. But Vail, clearly, northwest is the best. Beaver Creek, right here, can kind of block Vail on a west wind. Often on a west wind at Vail, the west side of Vail, the Lion's Head area, will have more snow than the rest of the bowls and blue sky. So it's sneaky on a west wind. Even if they get good snow, you kind of want to go to the bowls. Oftentimes, kind of Game Creek area has more snow than elsewhere. On a northwest wind, the back bowls and blue sky by far get the most. Now let's talk about Beaver Creek. Beaver Creek's a little different. Beaver Creek, again, blocked in all the same directions, but its best direction is from the west. Now, these are generalizations. Of course, Beaver Creek can get good snow in other directions, but these wind directions work, I'd say, 2/3 to 3/4 of the time, roughly speaking. All right, let's finish up with snow quality, the fluff. Snow quality. We measure it in inches of snow to inches of liquid. So if you had 15 inches of snow, you took a core sample of those 15 inches, you melted it down, and you got 1 inch of liquid, that would be 15 inches of snow to 1 inch of liquid, 15 to 1. That's roughly average for Colorado. 20 to 1 is super fluff. 20 to 1 is, right? Or you can ski through 2 feet of powder and he won't slow you down. That's 20 to 1. 10 to 1, it'll feel thick around here, but still decent. 5 to 1 is effectively cement. Not effectively, but it's cement. You would pick up 5 to 1 snow, and you could basically wring out the moisture. Good snowball making snow. So I like to show this brief clip to describe what 20 to 1 snow looks like. This is about a 20-second clip from Solomon Free Ski TV when they were filming in Japan a couple years ago. Yeah, that's fun. So, I mean, they're pro skiers, right? So they make it look really good. But 20 to 1 snow, any of us could just ski through that. It goes, it's really fun. Okay, so what does that, how do you get that? Well, how do you get fluff? Fluff is, what are they really skiing there? Air, right? So they're skiing these perfect snowflakes with a ton of airspace in between them. How do you get that? You need these perfect snowflakes with the arms and the legs like you would cut out. Remember when you cut out as a kid, those little, they stack so lightly on top of each other. There's a lot of air in there. Now, to get that, there's a lot of different snowflakes that can form. This is the amount of moisture, higher is more. This is temperature, warmer, colder. So based on the amount of moisture and the temperature, you get different types of snowflakes. So, I mean, this is the really challenging thing about snow forecasting. You're not just forecasting moisture and wind direction and all that, but you're also trying to figure out what type of snowflakes you're going to get. This is my favorite, the stellar dendrite, the perfect looking one up there. To get that stellar dendrite, we need a temperature of roughly 10 to 15 degrees on the mountain. And we also need reasonably weak winds. Why weak winds? So I heard so it doesn't compress, but why would it compress with with strong winds?
It spins the snowflakes around in the air and the tips of the dendrites come off.
Yeah, they break. The tips of those dendrites go, ow! Right? They hit each other. And then you knock off the arms and the legs. So when you ski wind-affected snow, and it feels thick, that's because there's not much air in there. The snow crystals are very tightly packed together. That's exactly right. All right, my tips on planning and chasing powder and snow. If you're going to plan months in advance, which many of us will do based on schedules or just needing to plan, you can't control the weather. This is more me talking to myself, right? But we always get nervous. Oh, I hope it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to this trip. You hope for the best, but you can't control it. What I will say is that in the U.S. and Canada, there's a great website called Z Rankings that shows stats for snowfall, basically what percentage of months will have X amount of snow or less snow. So if you're kind of trying to figure out where to go and want to hedge your bets a little bit, which resorts have more or less during certain months, that's a great website to look at. They've done a really good job there. Europe and South America. Anybody ski Europe and South America? Or South America here? A couple of folks. They're amazing places, but they're just like us. Sometimes it snows, sometimes it doesn't snow. There is just no guarantee there. You hope for the best, but you never know. Japan, January and February, best odds of powder in the world. Doesn't guarantee anything again, but absolutely the best odds of powder. If you go for 7 or 10 days to Japan, your chances of getting at least a couple really good powder days are very, very, very high. If you do go that far, the more days you can ski, the better, because you're going really far and you have high expectations. If you only go for 4 or 5 days, you never know. And like I said, January and February are the best. Okay, daily routine. This is what I think about. Oops, sorry about that. What do I do in a daily routine? You know what? It kind of irks me when people say, "Oh, I just looked at the forecast. Did you know there's going to dump tomorrow?" Yeah, I've been looking at that for 10 days, actually. I'm not saying that the forecast is perfect, but it's a lot easier just to look at something for a minute or two every day to kind of keep your mind fresh and see what's going on. It's not just about how much snow is coming, too. What terrain is open? What percentage of average snow is there? It doesn't matter if Montana is going to get a 2-foot dump if it hasn't snowed for, a month and then they're really hurting, or vice versa, right? So it's nice to kind of keep an eye on everything. 7 to 10 days out is when I start planning where to chase the snow. Look at the trends, right? We know we don't trust the details of a 7 or 10 day forecast, but at least you can see the trends. You start thinking about snow quality. Is it too warm? Is it too warm? Is it too cold? Is it windy? What's about to happen? And then finally, 3 to 7 days out, temperatures, wind, snow level, raining or snowing. Not a big deal around here, but most other places, that's something to think about at lower elevations, right? Tahoe can get 4 feet of snow at the top of the mountain, and it's raining at the bottom. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because the top of the mountain can ski amazingly. You just have to kind of reorient your mind to that, because we're not used to that around here. And yes, of course, crowds. It happens everywhere. A midweek 6-inch day can often top a weekend 14-inch day in terms of stress that goes along with skiing the powder. Something that I know you're all probably familiar with, but will terrain close or open late for avalanche and wind issues, right? It's great to see a 20-inch report in the morning. Maybe a lift doesn't open until 11 o'clock or noon, right? Because they have to do AVI control, and then a lot of people back up there, and there's a lot of stress around that. So it's just something else to think about when chasing. Just go. How much powder will you ski if you think about things and don't leave your house? 0. About 80 to 90% of the time that I leave my house and go ski powder, it's as fun or more fun than I expect, even if the forecast didn't exactly pan out. Just go. Pull the trigger, of course. I used to say get up early, right, because it kind of irks me too. Some people will comment on the website like, "Oh, Joel, you posted this powder picture. You probably just get early ups from, Vail or wherever because people like you and they want to show pictures." Like, no, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to write a 2-hour forecast, and then I drove, and then I got in line at 7:15, and I put my skis down, and I waited there for an hour and a half, and then I go ski, right? Like, you got to work for some of this. Obviously, the backcountry is a different deal. But I used to say get up early, and then when I gave a version of this talk in Colorado Springs, a guy said, "Hey, could you mention to remind people to also get plenty of sleep. I was like, you know, because sleep impacts performance, and you're more injury prone if you're tired. And I was like, yeah, that sounds good. What's your profession? He's like, well, I'm the head sleep doctor at Fort Carson. I was like, so you know what you're talking about. Awesome. So I added that, get some sleep as well. Also, of course, adjusting the plan is okay. Forecasts are great, but they're just forecasts. What actually happened is what you ski. Around here, we have a gift. Our gift is snow stake cameras. Nowhere else in the world has that gift, and I mean that sincerely. The snow stake cameras that we have along the I-70 corridor and around Colorado are the best I've seen in the world. It is incredibly difficult to locate a snow stake camera. And you're like, what? Come on, you just put a camera out there and it shows if it's snowing. Here's the deal. You need a place that is open enough, not treed so much, that the snow can actually fall there, because if there's a ton of trees, it blocks some of the snow. But if it's too open, the wind will come through and rip that snow right off the stake. So just sighting it is challenging. And then, okay, I found the perfect site. Well, I need power to the camera. And yes, you can do solar too, but that doesn't, I mean, you got to figure it out, right? It's not simple. And you need communication. These are hard things. I remember when Vail started putting these cameras in, and I forget which mountain, one of the Vail resorts had a camera before some of the others, and I was talking to somebody at headquarters about it. I was like, you know, it'd be great to have another camera out here. They said, yeah, you know, don't quote me on these numbers, but it was something like $10,000 or $20,000 to install, because I had to dig a trench in the summer to get power and communications from a nearby lodge to there and all that. You want it to be redundant, right? You don't want the cam to go down at 2 in the morning because people are relying and looking at that. So this stuff turns out to be reasonably challenging to do. We are very lucky to have that. You can fire up the OpenSnow app or your app of choice, look at how much snow fell at 11 at night or 4 in the morning before the report came out, and know exactly what you're going to ski. That is an absolute gift. You don't have to wait until 5 or 6 in the morning when that actual report comes out to know what is happening up at PHQ or Blue Sky. It is a gift. Last thing, and if anybody has interest in this, I'm happy to talk about SnowTel and kind of go through how to look at this data, especially useful if you're going to the backcountry or you just want to kind of double check resort measurements. But it's a little tricky, so we can go through this as well afterwards, and I'm happy to stay. So things to think about as I wrap up, and we'll do some Q&A. And I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but you can always email me, joel@opensnow.com. 1, how can I improve the talk? I absolutely want to know what you want, what I covered that you liked, what I didn't cover, tell me. 2, how can we improve OpenSnow? We are super open to feedback. Feedback doesn't mean we will implement it the next day. It takes time to figure things out, but we want to know. I'm building this for me and for all of you. 3, if you haven't subscribed to OpenSnow, and a lot of people just don't know that there is a subscription, there's a $19 a year subscription which adds more features and directly supports the site. If you come to OpenSnow and don't pay, that's totally fine. We welcome your viewership. We have advertising on the website that helps pay a lot of our bills. This is another way to directly support us, and we appreciate your support.
How many subscriptions do you have these days? You know, about 3 years ago.
It is a small percentage of that 2.5, a very small percentage of that 2.5 million, but it is growing 40 to 50% a year. So it is still a minority part of our revenue, but it is growing and is a very, it's good. We're happy with it. So, yeah. And of course, ask me anything, get in touch. I am happy to respond. If you take the time to email me, I'm happy to respond, and it just might take me a day or 2 during the season because things get busy. So here's the scoop. It is about a little after 7, well, there's the clock, it's 7:40. You guys have listened to weather nerdiness for an hour, which is amazing. Thank you so much. Let's take a few questions as a general audience, and then I will say, you know what? Folks that want to leave, and of course, if you need to leave now, please do. But I will stay as long as people have questions to chat. But let's take just a few general questions if there are any. And then for those that have more detailed questions, I'll stick around and chat as long as you'd like. General questions. Anybody? Hit me. Business, weather, lunar, internet commenters. Who wants to know about that? Ah! Yes.
A little bit
bit of a nerdy question, but on the different models, you know, you look at all those, you know, you're taking like these ensembles, and even the Utah forecast that we look at, you know, for Vail Pass.
Yep.
I mean, what variables are they playing with? You know, so
Great
like,
question.
like, you know, we're looking at wind speed, barometric pressure. I mean, what variables are they
Yep.
changing? You know, when they run the model 30, 40 times.
Yep. So the question is, I showed that graphic and I said, this is an average of 20 models, right? 20 versions of the model. The Europeans run their model 50 different times, and they tweak certain things between those models. What do they tweak is the question. They tweak two things. The data, first thing, data that goes into the model. Because the data that goes into the model, what's the current temperature? Where's the precipitation? Where are the clouds? You think that's perfect data? That's not perfect data, right? We don't know where all the snowflakes are falling, where all the clouds are, exactly what temperature it is between all the weather stations. So we have to make guesses around it. So they tweak the data going into the models, knowing that the data going in just isn't perfect. The second thing they tweak is some of the equations within the model. There might be an equation that says apply a factor of 0.4 to whatever quantity this is. Is 0.4 the right answer, or is 0.41 the right answer, or is 0.39 the right answer? Don't totally know. So they tweak the equations in the model as well. So they tweak the data going into the model, tweak the equations within the model, and that's what gives a spread of solutions. The European model on average is more accurate, not for any one particular storm, but just on average. Generally, the reason is because the way that they handle data coming into the model is better. They just handle it better. It's a messy thing, but they do it better, basically. Good question. Yes?
Things that they talk about in these variables all the time, and maybe you could explain it. What is the mean Julian oscillation?
The Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO. Madden-Julian oscillation was named after Madden and Julian, who figured it out. The MJO is kind of an area of storminess that rotates around the globe every 30 to 60 days. It's not a single storm. It's kind of an area of storminess that promotes storm formation. So it's, God, I'm trying to think about what the best, I can't think of a great analogy right now, but basically in certain phases of that, as it moves around the world during different seasons, it promotes more or less storms. So in Colorado, around now, as it moves through phases 8, 1, and 2, which is kind of in the Indian Ocean and then across Australia and into the Pacific, that promotes some storminess and snow here. But it changes throughout the year, and it's a little bit messy, but it's kind of one of those background things to pay attention to, but doesn't exactly predict when a storm will be here, kind of just ups the odds. That's all. So this year I've talked about it a little bit in my posts because it seems to be more impactful, and I can talk to you directly about why that might be. But kind of a cool thing. Yes?
Why do they name these meteorological phenomena the boy and the girl?
That's a good question. So El Nino, La Nina. Why is it named El Nino and La Nina? That warm water off the coast of South America was first discovered by Peruvian fishermen. And they noticed that when there was warmer than average water, it often happened late in the fall, early in the winter. Roughly